several years ago, several years ago, we were launching this project with California Department of Ed. And one of the key ideas that we were thinking, or some of the key ideas we were thinking about were, hey, there's this thing, project-based learning, like it would be great if we could like spread this, develop this. There are some classes where we might want to start to see more of it happening, like maybe see more of it happening in, traditionally academic classes that had gotten, especially the ones that had gotten really caught up in the like testing revolution, and hey, there are some experts already on campus that already do all of this, that have been doing it for their entire lives. There are these folks called career tech ed teachers, okay? And there's a lot of PBL expertise that's already baked into or built into so many different campuses. And in the CTE world, there was some thoughts of like, hey, actually, there's a lot of really great academic expertise that is happening over on the other side of campus. And we would like to find some ways to bring these folks together. We started to see even how like schools were physically segregated so that like traditionally academic classes were happening in one building, CTE classes were like all the way across the quad or down the hill or somewhere far away. And so some of the initial ideas were like, how can we be bringing this stuff together? Some of the other initial ideas you already heard me talk about of, hey, school wasn't originally designed to produce equitable outcomes. It was never originally designed to be a hub of innovation. And sometimes educators get caught in a loop of solving the same problems. And how can we bring together ideas of equity, innovation, and improvement? And we started walking around and started looking around and driving around and thinking. And one of the things that was exciting to me was just like, well, like in the world, who's doing awesome projects just like themselves? Like maybe the answer isn't in a school. Just briefly, so I saw some people mimicking our stretching poster over there. Did y'all see the HTH-GSE stretching poster? We visited the Costco eyeglass manufacturing facility in South County, San Diego, because sometimes to get good ideas, it really helps actually to just get out of a school, to look somewhere else. Because, when you go into a school, you can get caught up seeing stuff that looks just like your school. You can be like, oh, like they have kids with hoods on also, or something like that. When you go somewhere else, all that stuff gets stripped away and you can see what's really going on. So I was really excited by people who were just building amazing things, doing it with kids, sometimes kids who maybe shouldn't even be on a job site because they're not old enough or something like that. Maybe doing it outside of the school hours, like before school, after school, weekends, things like that. But doing it despite any barrier that stood in their way. And I'm sure you know where I'm going with this. This is a long walk to me saying, I came across something called, a group of people called, I think it was like Project H, Girls Garage. And I saw this farmer's market in North Carolina where I was just utterly blown away by the work being done and the people behind it. And so I cold called Emily Pilloton, and I was like, you have got to come to High Tech High. Please come down here. That was several years ago. I'm so excited that we've been able to work together in this sort of stuff here at High Tech High. We've sent some of our teachers up to Project H and to Girls Garage so that they can learn from her. Emily is up in the Bay Area in Oakland. We saw some people nod saying that they knew her. Yeah, if you are somewhere in Emily's neighborhood, let's hear it right now. Yeah, there we go. It's probably time for me to give the mic to somebody else. I am so happy to be able to welcome to the PBL Leadership Academy again. Thank you so much for being back, Emily Pilloton.
Great. Hi, everybody. Hi. Good morning. Nice to see all of you. Hi. How's everyone's morning? Looked like there was fun stuff happening here, at least. Yeah, great. Thanks for having me. I was telling Randy, this is like my first plane flight with my 7-month-old, so I'm like a little tired. But yeah, really happy to be here. And like Randy said, I've been here many times, and this is like one of my favorite groups of educators to talk with. So I also apologize. I don't have like a monitor here, so I'm gonna have to turn around a little bit to see what I'm showing you. But one of the reasons I love coming down here and and talking with all of you is because project-based learning is sort of like the heart and soul of what I do before I even knew what that term was. And so I love talking with educators because I am not trained formally as an educator, but I've been working as an educator for 16 years. And so I love also learning from all of you, like how you do PBL right, because I'm just kind of like making it up as a person who studied architecture in college. So I want to just share a little bit of our work, some ideas. I'll try to be like brief and non-boring, and there is an activity we're going to do together. So, I wanted to just start with this idea. This is a question that I'm constantly asking myself, and I think is also at the heart of what we all do as PBL educators. This idea of like building the world we want to see and giving students the tools to do that for themselves also. We use this term a lot at Girls Garage, which I'll talk more about in a second. That building the world we want to see, embedded in that is like a sense of optimism and hope, and that you believe that the world can be better, and that also you may have the tools and the skills to make it so. So I'm going to give you like a real brief background on like who I am and where I came from. I'll keep it quick. But these are my grandparents. I'm half French and half Chinese, so these are my French grandparents and my Chinese grandparents. Coincidentally, so both of my grandfathers were engineers and both of my grandmothers were librarians. And like later in life, I realized like if you could make that a Venn diagram, I kind of feel like the thing in the middle would be architecture, which is somehow what I ended up studying. I grew up around my grandparents, and I think thanks to all four of them, I was lucky to see, not like on a day-to-day basis what engineers did, but I understood that like there was a career path that was about like making things and making things in the world. My grandfather on the right worked for International Harvester and used to design tractors and other farm equipment. And then my grandmothers, who were both librarians, were just like constantly like reading, making art. They were so curious. And like anytime I was around them, it was always like some fun, exploratory, creative project. So I went on to study architecture through my grandparents and also through this experience that I had as a high school student that I think about all the time now as a person who works with high school students. I participated in this service trip down in Central America. This is in Belize. I think I'm like 16 in this photo. And I went with this group of other teenagers from all over the country, and we built a town park. And this was like 1997 or something. And I remember like as a 16-year-old going on this trip, and as a person who, like I grew up in an almost exclusively white community, I spent a lot of my childhood feeling like I was different and trying to figure out how I fit. And this was really the first experience that I had as a young person that made me feel like I had power, and that I had some kind of agency and some way of contributing something to the world. And it wasn't just about like learning how to frame a roof or like mix concrete. It was also about like working with local masons and learning from them and contributing something in a community that even after I left would still be there and would still be in the lives of other people. So this is sort of like between my grandparents and this experience, I realized that I don't know that I would have put it this articulately at the time, but like architecture was this field that was interesting to me because it allowed me to be like at the center of that Venn diagram and also build something real. And so I went on and studied architecture at UC Berkeley. I went to the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, which is where this photo was taken. And I studied architecture in Chicago as well. This is a photo from the first construction site I ever worked on. I was 22 in this photo, and this is Millennium Park. If any of you have been there, this is the band shell in the making, which they called it Millennium Park because they wanted to open in 2000. This is 2004, so that's how far behind they were. But this was an incredible opportunity, like a project on a scale that I had never witnessed. This is not just the Millennium Park side, but I actually worked for the museum, which is right across the street. There was a Renzo piano edition happening at the same time. So it was like a huge, huge city effort. And so again, I'm like struck by like, wow, the act of building the world we want to see and being a part of that process was also like the way in which my brain was wired and the way I wanted to continue to learn after I had left a formal learning environment. Okay, so fast forward though to 2007. So I'm like 2 years out of grad school at this point. And, I have like $80,000 in student loans. I am like feeling all the pressures of a 23-year-old. Like, I have to have a job. I need a 401k. I have to do all these like grown up things that I'm supposed to be doing. And so I ended up working in architecture with a capital A, like the very sort of like traditional, I am on my path to becoming an architect. And I ended up working for a clothing company, like the corporate office of a national clothing company. Am I being recorded? I'll just tell you who it was. It was the Gap in San Francisco. I have nothing bad to say about them, but this is sort of the end of my corporate journey here. So I worked for the Gap as a store architect for 3 weeks. I made it 3 weeks. And on my last day, it was my last day because I went into this meeting. It was a Tuesday morning, I remember. And I went into this meeting that was like 2 hours long, talking about doorknobs, like which doorknobs should we pick for the next dressing room renovation. And like, okay, I'm fine. I understand that's a design decision that needs to be made. But I just remember like thinking back to how I felt on that trip to Belize and how different those experiences felt. And I had this like out of body experience and was like, yeah, I'm not going to do this anymore. And I quit that afternoon. And that's the last employer I've had other than myself. So when I left this job though, I had this like feeling that there was another way to practice design and building and architecture that felt more like learning to me, that felt more like how I felt as a 16-year-old up on that ladder, that was more connected to human beings and community, and also like where I could do the physical work with my own hands. And so I started a nonprofit. At 26, I had like no idea what that entailed. I'd never run a business before. I had $1,000 in my bank account. I was living with my parents at the time, none of which are like a great recipe for starting a nonprofit, but I did it. And this has sort of been a thing that I realize I feel like I'm pretty good at, is just like starting a thing before I'm ready. This is also true of parenting. Like, you just do it. You figure it out. So I think one of the first things I want to share is just this like idea, and I know a lot of you are already doing iteration, and like this is a part of the design process, but encouraging students and also yourself as an educator to start the thing before you're ready, starting anywhere also, like there is no wrong place to start, and then just like doing a thing over and over and over and over again until you get to somewhere cool, which you always will. And so the best example of this I can show is that when I was, it was 2008 when I started the nonprofit under the name Project H Design. And within like a year and a half, I got this cold call email from a superintendent of a school district in rural North Carolina, the eastern swampy part of the state. And this is a superintendent who had just been hired. He sent me this like 2-line email that was like, hey, I read about your work in Dwell magazine. Want to come move to North Carolina? And I was like, what the heck? What kind of superintendent is sitting around reading Dwell magazine? And like, he's just like blindly inviting me to come, and it was very confusing. Anyway, I met this guy, and it turns out he was a real visionary. I had not worked with educators before. I was trained in architecture, and came to find out that he had a very similar like vision, just happened to be an educator, that he wanted students to be connected to their communities. He wanted them to be doing real things. And so I went down there. To make a long story very short, I did end up moving there, and I ended up pitching and teaching a high school, basically a shop program. It was a shop program with community purpose. I'll show you what that means in a second. But on the first day of class, I walked in, and I've never taught high school before. I'm fully aware that I'm not trained, or this is another start before you're ready. Maybe like a little bit blindly cocky that I could do this, but walked into a classroom of 14 students who had selected to be in this class, and yet all of us are looking at each other like, what are we doing here? And many of them, this is a district that was failing on all sort of traditional metrics, was quote unquote failing. I had students who were reading at like a 4th or 5th grade level. I had students who did not know how to do fractions, which was an important skill when we were talking about like measurements. But they all wanted to be there. And so one of the first things that we did, because I didn't know where to start either, is I just said, all right, we're going to start anywhere. And this is a list. Has anyone seen this list? Does anyone know what this is? Okay, so there's an artist named Richard Serra. Maybe some of you know Richard Serra. Richard Serra, actually, he just passed away like 2 weeks ago. He's an incredible sculptor who used to do these like huge scale bronze, very like gestural, large scale sculptures. They're often installed at like sculpture gardens outside of museums. And they're gorgeous. They're huge. You can often like walk through them. Anyway, he wrote this list. This is a list of verbs, and he wrote it, or mostly verbs. And he wrote it for himself because, and he's talked about this list, that when he was stuck, he would just pull out this list, pick a word, and make something. And often those things would become like incredibly beautiful, famous sculptures. So I was like, all right, let's start here. So I asked my students to make a model of every single word on that list, and then to go back to the beginning and make another model of every single word on that list, and to hang up all of their models. This is like one portion of a very much larger curtain wall of all their models. And this was just purely about making. Like none of this, there's no consequence to this. Like pick a word, make something, pick a word, make something. Just getting like students in the muscle memory of giving themselves permission to make something out of nowhere. So these are some of the models. And then we took those models, and then started like refining them. And at this point, I'm thinking like, okay, what are we going to turn these things into? And there were a number of students whose families are chicken farmers, and a lot of folks who raise chickens. So I was like, let's build some chicken coops. So we took a couple of these models that were like extra promising. I was like, pick 10 that you like, pick 5 that you like. And we started refining them into forms that looked like something. And then slowly they became more and more tangible and real. This is a coop that you'll see in a second that came from to bend. This is like sandwiched plywood with some sheet metal hinges. And then students, sorry, I think this button is a little, we like physically lifted this thing up and started pulling it into shape. I had to teach a little bit of MIG welding because it needed a structural frame. So this came from like an art idea, but then there's like a lot of technical knowledge that you have to embed into those conceptual ideas. And then slowly, we just weatherproofed the roof. And then this is the final coop that came from like a random word on a Richard Serra verb list. And it's gorgeous. There were a couple others that we did. Maybe I'm too far away there. So these are the students that built it. And then there was another one. This came from, does anyone want to guess what this word was? Twist. Oh, the next one is twist. This one's to hinge. It's to hinge. And I'm so sorry. I don't know what's going on here. Oh, that's to twist. That one has like 2 boxes and this like DNA twisting thing that connects them. So yeah, and this was also like the first project that many of these students had ever built. This is the first project I've ever built with students. And I felt like it was really powerful for all of us to just acknowledge like, we're all in this situation together and we're starting from wherever we want to start from. And I made a promise to them that I would I would help them get to somewhere cool. And I feel like we achieved that. And that was really like proof of concept for them that the act of building also doesn't have to be so precious. Like you don't have to have this light bulb idea at the very beginning. And for me, it was a reminder that as an educator, like iteration and all the things we ask students to do, like we also have to do for ourselves in creating a lesson plan or a project. Okay, so we're gonna do some model making. In front of you, this will be quick, but it's just like a fun way to get moving and to like get in our brains and hearts and souls around this idea. So you should have on your table a stack of, if you don't have these things, just poach them from a table next to you. If you can grab like 1 to 2 sheets of construction paper each, and then a pair of scissors and some tape, which you can share with your neighbor and just take a strip, whatever works best. All right, I'm gonna get my timer out. Okay, everyone good? Steal whatever you need to steal. All right, so here's what's gonna happen while you're getting settled. We're gonna do 5 rounds of this. I'm gonna pick a word and you're gonna have 60 seconds That's barely enough time to think about it. You just gotta like, oh, to twist, tape it, cut it, whatever, and you're done. 60 seconds actually ends up feeling like an eternity. Are we ready? Okay, the first word is going to be let's start with an easy one. To roll. Start at the top. Ready, go. You have 30 seconds. You have 10 seconds. It feels long. I feel like we could do this in 30 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, what do you got? Hold them up. Show them to your table mates. Show them to me. Okay, we got a lot of tubes. We got some cones. We got some abstract objects. We got some multi-layered color things. Gorgeous. Okay, great. That was an easy one. Okay, get ready for the next one. We're going to do where's Randy? You want to pick one? To hide. Oh, wow. You went real conceptual. Okay, to hide. Go. That was a big leap from roll to hide. You can also use your previous model. Oh. Twenty seconds. Five seconds. 2, 1. All right, what do you got? To hide. Very cool, very cool. Oh, a lot of people made like enclosures with a thing in it. Very cool. A lot of you used your role model. Oh, your model from role. Yeah, great. Okay, round 3. Let's do there's so many good ones. To collect. Ready, go. Okay. "20 seconds. Oh, I see people using other things on the table. I love that. "10 seconds. 2, 1. All right, let's see to collect. I got a basket of pens. Let's see what else we got. Very cool. Oh, yeah, lots of little baskets and vessels. Some confetti. Great, beautiful. Okay, we're gonna go 2 more. Let's do let's do an of one. How about of gravity? Ooh, of gravity. Go. 30 seconds. I see some hanging objects, some people dropping things, some hanging things. A paper airplane. 10 seconds. Three, two, one. Let's see it. Lots of hanging things, lots of some throwing of things. Great. Beautiful. Okay. All right, for our last round, we're going to do gravity again. So you got to come up with something brand new. Ready? Gravity part 2. Go. That's okay. It's okay. Yeah. 30 seconds. Yep. 15 seconds. Oh, wow. There's like a hangman situation happening. 5 seconds. 2, 1. Show me gravity part 2. Oh, an apple. Twisty things. There was like a hangman, yep, with a roll of tape. Beautiful. How was gravity part 2? Stressful? Stressful. Great. I like that. I would make you do like 5 more rounds of gravity, but I won't. But I like the idea of like having to keep doing the same idea over and over. Thank you for playing my little game. So, yay, great job. Feel free to take them home as souvenirs. I just did this activity with students a couple days ago. It's kind of like my go-to, like get out of your brain, get into your body creative thing. So this is, again, Richard Serra. It's a list of verbs. It's a great place to start. Okay, so after I had started before I was ready and began teaching high school and building things with young people, I then, now that I'm in a classroom setting, I'm thinking about like how much I want to do right by my students and how I also want to be building projects that have a level of ambition. And in a community this is a town of 1,500 people in North Carolina, I really wanted to go back to that feeling that I had in Belize of like doing something that was ambitious and like bigger than ourselves. And like, could I figure out a way to do that in a traditional school context? So I met with the mayor and a couple folks that were in sort of like civic positions in the town. And I'm like a total outsider also. I'm like a half Asian girl from California. They're like, what are you even doing here? But I had to lean on my students and remind folks that like, this is not about me. I wanted students to have an experience that was meaningful. And so asked the mayor and a few other folks what they felt like the town needed that we could build. And many of them said, we need a farmer's market. And this is a town like in the middle of nowhere. The closest farmer's market was 85 miles away. And yet this is like a place with an agricultural legacy that is also a food desert. So the idea of a farmer's market was, at the time and in that place, pretty revolutionary. So just like with the chicken coops, we started from, I don't even remember what the first conceptual prompt was, but just started making models, like looking at precedents of what other farmers markets look like, looking at non-farmers market precedents, like what does architecture look like in general? What are some forms and spaces that inspire us? So we made tons of models. We went and talked to farmers. We went and talked to folks who would like to start a business selling produce. and ended up with a pretty cool design. When we first presented some of the design ideas, one of the coolest things, and this is like the power of community partnerships, is that my students, like this is my student Karan on the left and one of the town council members, Jock, on the right. These are two folks who in this community like would not have had an opportunity to really meet, let alone work together on a thing that they both were excited and passionate about. But here was this project that was able to create that space for them to do that. So this is like one thing I love about PBL and like forging community partnerships, that it creates like really unexpected radical partnerships between across generations and with folks that otherwise kids may not have access to, and vice versa. So I designed this farmer's market, and then June 15th or whatever, the end of the school year came around, and I was like, all right, now we're going to spend the summer building it. Every other kid is like on a jet ski. It's like 100 degrees in North Carolina. Like everyone's enjoying their summer. And my students were on a job site all summer from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. every day building this farmer's market. And it was a great, like Randy was mentioning, like you have to figure out how to make things happen, even if it's outside the school day. And I was really like, oh my God, are they even going to show up? And they did. They showed up every day because they felt like this was their baby. You know, this was a thing that started as that model on their desk, and it was important that they saw it through. So these are the sort of like structural trusses of the building. And I'm skipping over like a lot of the technical knowledge of like carpentry and basic construction. But we did have to embed all that as well. One of the best things that I really loved living in rural North Carolina, and one of the reasons is like there are neighbors who will just bring a piece of machinery to a job site and leave the keys taped on the side and say, have fun. So like we're like, okay, I guess we got to figure out how to use this. And, but again, like for kids, we're like, we're all figuring this out together. So we raise the trusses into the air. There's always this photo in any project of any scale. There's always a photo on like the day it becomes real. And for construction, that's a very obvious, it's like when the thing becomes three-dimensional on the site. And it's like such a special moment because students stand there and they're like, oh my God, that was a model on my desk. And now it's like this thing that people will inhabit. I also love these moments doing this work with kids because people will be driving by looking like there's a construction site with 16-year-olds and like I'm the foreperson. It's very confusing. And I love that. I love the idea that like this type of work also shifts the way that the public thinks about who gets to do this work. So this is just like back to basics, laying the floor joists, the deck joists. And then this is the finished farmer's market, which was a 2,200 square foot structure. It's still standing today. This was finished in 2011. And so it's been 13 years. Also, we didn't just build a farmer's market. We also had to like start a farmer's market and like get people to come and sell things. And so since 2011, there's been 48, actually maybe a few more, 48 vendors that have been there every week. And it's still like functioning and every Saturday. There's also like line dancing and they do all kinds of things there. This is just another view. This is from the opening day. And on opening day, my students, this is like August, it's the end of their summer, they're going back to school like the next day. They didn't even get a summer. But it was really special to see them stand there. The mayor gave them the key to the city. It was like a really moving moment. And there were their families and folks from the town. For them to see that this is what kids are capable of was just as important as my students knowing that that's what they were capable of. That we were able to like change a conversation around who is the creative capital in this town. So I think I'm showing you this because this is hands down the most ambitious project I've ever pulled off. And at the beginning, I was like, this is insane. Like, there's no way. How the heck am I going to be able to pull this off as like a person who's never taught high school before, who's never like independently built a project of this scale. But I just had to believe that if I pulled in the right people, there was a way to pull this off. And I got into the mindset of like, who can I find as a subcontractor? I mean that literally in the context of construction, but also as an educator, like who can you bring in to do the things that you can't? that actually projects like this are maybe not as out of reach as we think. So I like to challenge folks to think about like, what is your pipe dream project? And then if you were to backwards map it, like, is it really that insane? Like, probably not. There's probably like a handful of folks you can bring in. There's resources you can look outside of your school for, and that these types of projects are so transformative for us as educators and for students. The second sort of chapter of this shop class work is that I then brought the program back to the Bay Area to a charter school in Berkeley, which is like, could not be more different than rural North Carolina in so many ways. And so we're not going to build a farmer's market in Berkeley. There's like 20 of them already. But like, what is the pipe dream project in the East Bay? And so I had students and I asked my students that. I wasn't going to come in and say, hey, here's my pipe dream project. The thing that they all said, and many of them were experiencing this personally, is the housing crisis. There was like such a lack of affordable housing. This is back in 2012. But even then, like, I had students who were living in, one-bedroom apartments with 3 generations, whose housing was tenuous at best. And so they wanted to build housing for unhoused people. And I was like, oh my gosh, how, like, this feels, again, like so out of reach. But we started from the same anywhere place. We started making models. We started doing research. We started talking to people. And then we started building. And we ended up building 2 tiny homes. I have a lot of mixed feelings about tiny homes, but in this context, it made a lot of sense. We built 2 tiny homes. I'm showing this picture because this is my student, Tanisha, who was like hell bent on doing the siding on these houses out of pallet wood. And has anyone like tried to build furniture out of pallet wood? Like Pinterest boards of pallet wood furniture. It's a freaking nightmare. It's like a recipe for tetanus. It's just like, it's such a pain to pull those things apart. The wood is really not great quality, but she was like, no, I can get 200 free pallets. I want to do the siding in pallet wood. And I was like, all right, Tanisha, I'm tasking you with this. Don't fail me. She's like, I got it. And so she like led this team to take apart 200 pallets, like rip them all down to a uniform width, stain some of them, and this is the result. So these 2 tiny homes, if you look at their form, like when they're pushed together, they kind of make the shape of like the archetypal house with the gable roof, which I love. But these are 2 homes that were designed and built by students, siding led by Tanisha. And then they were gifted to organizations that serve unhoused individuals, specifically in like a sort of tiny home village situation. So this is one of them that's still being lived in up in Oregon. So another example of like a thing that even I at the beginning was like, how are we going to pull this off? And it was truly just like the grit of students and then the partnerships we had with these other organizations and folks like Tanisha, who was like, I can get 200 pallets. Great. Like it is my responsibility as an educator to say yes to that. So I am like always thinking about what my next pipe dream project is. Right now, I'll just tell you, I'm going to manifest this. My pipe dream project right now is I want to be able to buy a home, flip it with students, and then with the profits, put that into college funds for them, and then like reclaim the initial investment and keep doing it. This is my pipe dream. Putting it out there. Great. Okay. So the next sort of phase of this, though, after I've built some of these projects and I'm like, okay, there's something here for students as an educator. There's some proof of concept. However, because I'm working in a construction context, and I won't like bore you with all the statistics about the gender imbalance in construction, but it's bad. The worst one is that on construction sites, only 4% of construction workers are female, which is like 1 in 25. This is horrible. So, and this is a thing that I'm like, been working in the past 10 years to change. Anyway, as I'm working on these projects, I'm starting to notice that there is a difference in experience between my male and female students. Even with me as a female teacher, I was like, there's something happening here where I would say like, hey, I need someone to go cut 8 pieces at 96 inches on the chop saw. And I would see my female students, like their eyes light up, and then they would kind of look around, and then they would put their hand down. And I don't blame them for this. This is like a thing that I'm certain some of the female identifying people in this room know what I'm talking about. You walk into a room where maybe you're in the minority and you're just constantly doing like what I call a social calculus of like, do I belong here? How do I prove that I belong here? How do I say things that make people believe that I belong here? When do I raise my hand? It's just exhausting. And so I wanted to just see what would happen if I pulled some of my female students out and worked with them in an all-female setting. So I just started pulling out groups of like 4 or 5 girls, and I would be like, hey, let's just frame this wall over here. And it was a total game changer. It was like all of that effort that they were putting towards that social calculus was like gone, and they could just do the thing. And they were also working together in a really beautiful, supportive way. And so this led me, what did I do? This led me to think about creating an even more specific space just for young girls and non-binary and gender-expansive youth who are typically not like welcome or embraced on construction sites. And I thought about this a lot too, like not just in the sort of metaphorical idea of creating space, but also like the actual design and the actual like, how do you set up your classroom? How do you set up a space that communicates this is a safe space where your identity and your lived experience as a student is not just welcome, but is actually like essential to the work that we do. And so I opened a space in 2013 called Girls Garage. This is in West Berkeley. And this is like the exact same work that I was doing in an in-school context, but I set up as a separate space. It physically says girls on the front of the building. And it's an after-school and summer program where I invited, first in a summer camp and then after school, girls starting at age 9 all the way up through graduating high school to do really cool community-facing construction work together. And so I'm not going to go too much into like the sort of cultural ways in which we establish safe space. I would love to talk to you all about that all day long. But I actually want to show some of the like physical design elements of this space that I think are replicable in a lot of classrooms. Because I went to school for architecture and I'm like kind of a design snob, I'm like, okay, I have this space. I want girls to feel welcome. How do I communicate that in a way that's not like, let's just paint everything pink? I mean, come on. So there's a couple things that I thought about in the creation of this space. One is like having a space that feels open and also accessible and also predetermined what happens where. There was a moment like in the classroom design where it was like everything has to be movable, like everything has to turn into something else. It's like a table and like a whiteboard and a this and a that, and everything's on wheels. And I don't know if some of you have classrooms like this, and I've been in those classrooms, but I think for a space like this, like I want a student to walk in and understand, okay, that's where this happens, that's where this happens, that's where this happens, that's where the hammers are. I feel like that gives students a sort of sense of like, I know where I fit in because everything else is stationary. There's also color. Like I actually worked with a branding agency, and I'm not telling you should go like brand the heck out of your classroom, but I do think there's like something to thinking about what are the common elements that you carry through in your classrooms that sort of like give your classroom an identity and that give it a story that is welcoming to students. So we use this, you'll see it on the next slide, there's this reddish color. There's also this bluish color. There is no pink. Sometimes there's pink. But creating a space that felt like both gender neutral and not like, girls, it's for you, but also like highly technical. There's a lot of tools in here that are like the same tools you would see on a job site. We put this slogan on the wall, fear less, build more. That's our motto. And it's right above a 12-inch miter saw, which is like for most kids when they come in, the first tool they use and also like one of the scariest. So it's very intentional that like that is right above that tool. And here's, Soleil. This is a 9-year-old. She's now a senior in high school, using the miter saw for the first time. And that blade is like bigger than her head. And, you know, things like this, setting up a space where there are things that look intimidating and then creating the space around it so that students know it's safe to try them. We talk a lot about practicing bravery, like as a muscle, like you can do push-ups, that's makes your biceps bigger or whatever. You can also practice bravery and build it as a muscle. We talk about bravery as like not a thing that you just are. You're not just brave. Like you actually have to be scared first in order to choose to be brave. So these are all things that are communicated in space as well. Every single cohort of students we have, this is one of our high school cohorts, and all of our high school students attend for free. They're very diverse cohorts. They come from all over the Bay. Almost none of them know each other. And so we also have to communicate in this space that like this is a space for everyone and you all have an opportunity to bond in this space. And so one of the things we do is we always screen print t-shirts. Like everyone screen prints their own t-shirt and then everyone has that t-shirt, which is such a small thing. Like I know most camps give t-shirts away, but we make sure students get to make their own. And that just makes like, it's such a slight thing, but it's an artifact that they take home that they've all made together. And then so we were in that space that I just showed you for like 8 years. We just this past fall moved into a new space, and I won't show you all the details of that space, but a lot of the things I just showed carried over with a couple of new things that I've learned that we didn't have in the first space. One is like to carve out a space for reflection and relaxation, even if it's like the tiniest little space. So we added a living room, like when students show up, like they can just like hang out on the sofa before they come into the classroom space. I also realized that like a lot of kids and myself, like we use bathrooms as a small moment of like solo reflection. And so when we moved into this space, I was like, I'm gonna trick out these bathrooms. They're gonna be the best spaces in the whole workshop. And so this is Dusty Rose on the right and Dark and Stormy on the left. We have like a running poll to see which is more popular. Raise your hand if you like Dusty Rose better. Okay, how about Dark and Stormy? Wow, okay, that was, Dusty Rose is winning at Girls Garage, but anyway, I think a lot of adults like Dark and Stormy because it feels like a nightclub bathroom, just like, it just needs the disco ball. So anyway, also things like having students' names and identities represented in the space. This could be photos, but every single student that's ever come through our doors is physically on the wall. So when a student walks in, like they know that this is their space because it says it is. Their name is right there. This is my colleague, Bethany, who like painstakingly wrote every single name on the wall. And every session we add more. And then of course, like creating spaces where all are welcome. This is not just a space for students. This is also for parents, for community members. When we had our grand opening, there were like grandmothers and funders and like corporate partners and so many people that came out to celebrate the opening of this space. And making sure that folks know, like, you don't just have to be a 15-year-old girl. This is a space where all these like peripheral folks are welcome and essential. And then the last thing I'll say about space is like there is also an opportunity with our projects to do projects that respond to the identities and stories that kids walk in the door with. And so a couple years ago, I started to notice that more and more of our students were identifying as gender expansive or queer. And actually, the majority of our staff also identify as queer. And I was like, okay, well, this is a thing that we should both acknowledge and then also like celebrate. This is like who we are as a community. And so we were invited by the San Francisco Pride Parade to build a parade float. And so we're like, this is going to be awesome. Let's invite students. What should it be? And students were like, well, obviously, it should be a giant toolbox. So we built a giant toolbox parade float with the signs that we marched with. And then, of course, a giant toolbox needs giant tools. So we got a bunch of insulation foam, paper mache, and then these are the giant tools in the giant toolbox with students in the parade. So like this is a project that came directly out of looking at who's in the room, listening to how they're identifying, and providing a project that like validates that and celebrates like you're in the room and this is not just a space for you. This is like a place where we do work that honors who you are. I think I have 2 more ideas. I don't know how I'm doing on time. I'm sorry, Randy. Okay, woo, I'm gonna go fast. Okay, so this is a thing that all of you are familiar with. I'm sure you could actually school me on how you think about community partnerships. In an architectural and building sense, there's like two moments that are really important that I think are like the essence of community partnership, and I call them the ribbon cutting and the barn raising. So all of our projects at Girls Garage are also focused on a community client. That means like sometimes we build the cutting board that you take home to your mom, sometimes, but more often than not, we're doing pro bono work for other nonprofits. And that's really important for students because there's like a consequence to that work. If they're building the cutting board to take home to their mom, they're like, my mom will love me no matter what. If you're building a sandbox for a preschool, like they're like, okay, we really got to make this sandbox safe and beautiful for these 3-year-olds. And so this is a sandbox for the local preschool. And at the ribbon cutting, they like presented us with this cute sign. We presented the sandbox to them, and like 60 seconds after I took this photo, 53-year-olds like dive bombed into this sandbox. So moments like that, like for students, is like such a validation of the work. It's like a way for them to see like, not only did I build this thing, but like these are the people who are using it, and in this case, like loving it and having so much joy. So providing these moments of like collective celebration and seeing how the thing is used. There's also like this moment of barn raising. I feel like with a lot of projects, there's a tendency to like design and build the thing in the classroom or do the thing in the classroom, and then it's like gifted to the community partner. But having opportunities for co-creation, where like we built this community sauna for a really awesome land stewardship organization. And instead of us just like showing up and building it, we showed up and we built it together with the folks that are from that organization, who also had the good machinery. So this was like a real co-building experience. This is also one of the wildest, like most technical projects I've ever built. It was, these wall panels had like 12 layers of stuff. Now everyone's like, can you build me a sauna in my backyard? I'm like, no. Do you have $20,000 and 4 months of time? Because it was really, really technical. Anyway, it's also beautiful and was co-built between students and folks from this land stewardship organization. Another thing about community partnerships that has been successful at Girls Garage is working with organizations that are just starting. Being a part of like a strategic plan or like a larger plan for an organization. This is a geodesic dome that we built for a brand new agricultural institute that was trying to think about how to create a large area to teach sustainable agriculture. And the geodesic dome was the first thing on their land. So as part of that, our students got to be part of like the master planning. Like, we're going to build this dome, but like what else is going to be there? There's this keyhole garden now. There's like all these paths. It's going to be planted in this very specific way. And students got to be part of like, yes, they built the dome, but the dome was part of this like larger mission of an organization that was brand new. So I love like connecting students to new organizations, like right at the time when everyone's thinking really big. And then my last project showing, this is one of my favorites. This is a greenhouse we built for a middle school. And because it was for a middle school, we wanted to also have an art element that was like really cute and beautiful and joyful. And so this is a graphic that was designed in collaboration with middle school students from that school. And the result is like this lovely, bright graphic. This is a construction project and an art project put together. And then at the ribbon cutting for this project, this is there's some of the middle school students and a teacher and his little 6-year-old daughter. These ribbon cuttings, like, they seem kind of cliche, but they're such a moment of joy. And I think having projects that have a moment of pure and total joy where everyone can come together and it's just like pure happiness. Like, I will only do projects with students now that have that element of joy. We talk a lot about joy at Girls Garage and how it's our most fundamental currency. Okay, the last thing I want to leave you with is this idea that I've thought about so much in the form of mentorship as an educator, that like, I don't like being in the position where I'm standing up here. This is exactly what I'm doing right now. I apologize. I'm standing up here and you're standing there and I'm just like giving information. Like, this is not my ideal. This is not ideal. And I don't think this is what any of us as PBL educators want to do, that we are the bearers of the wisdom and the learning, and we are bequeathing it unto our students. So we talk about our learning community at Girls Garage as an ocean and not a river, that it's not just like this one-way flow. There's a whole ecosystem of players and people and resources that all symbiotically support each other. So a couple quick examples. This is our staff. We're all female and non-binary. We have multiple times we come together, just as all of you do for professional development. We have a stipend every year where staff can go out and like go take a screen printing class or do an arts residency and cultivate their own creative practice. We have moments where we invite professionals in from construction or engineering or architecture to speak with students. So there's that flow from like inside the walls to beyond the walls. Sometimes learning communities, Sometimes learning communities are about documentation. This is a book that I wrote for folks who maybe can't come to Girls Garage. This is a way that we can share what we are doing. And then my favorite example of learning communities as an ocean. Thank you. Hello. This is a trip our first ever trip where we took students to Vermont to build a bus stop. And when we went, I was like, okay, I got to have chaperones. I got to have enough adults. I was like freaking out about what if someone gets poison oak? What do we do? And I was like, I need one more adult apart from our instructors to come with me. And my mother was like, I want to go. So my mom is over there on the left. And she came on this trip. She's like, I'll just do the laundry. I'll just be in the background. I'll just like, make the meals. And then it turned out that, this is the bus stop. Turned out that my mom was like the most essential person on this trip. And she also, this is me teaching her how to use the chop saw, because she was like, oh, maybe I want to jump in. So like she ended up working with us on the construction site. I had students who were teaching each other and then teaching my mom. And then we would go home and my mom would teach my students how to make dumplings. It was this like beautiful kind of unscripted like ecosystem of learning. This happens a lot also with students who are either alumni or they're high school students and they end up teaching younger students. So like creating spaces and like structured ways in which older students can teach younger students. I know this is a thing that many of you are very good at as well. Some of our older students mentoring some of the younger students here. And then this is kind of a random thing, but one thing we've been trying to do a lot more lately is inviting elders into our community, into our classroom, elders in our community. And so this is a group of incredible older ladies who are textile artists, and they do like natural dyes and they do quilting in pretty traditional methods. And so they had emailed us and said, we need a sewing table. Can you all build us a sewing table? And I was like, yes, but can you come and teach us how to do natural dye? And so they came and we built them a table and they taught us natural dye. So tapping into like the generational knowledge in our communities is one of, I think, like within our ocean of learning, like a thing not to be forgotten. Okay, and this is my last thing. I'm going to just end with this. I'm constantly reminded in doing this work as an educator, like work that is tangible, that's in the community, that we underestimate how, like when we plant seeds now, like how they pay off later. And I think that's like we all know this as educators. Like you have a fourth grader and like 10 years later, they come back to your classroom and you're like, oh my God. But this is true of the work also, like that when you do projects like this, they often beget other incredible projects like this. I have students some of our graduates from last year who went on to various schools. This is at the end of our Vermont trip. And when we came back and we were unloading the truck of all the tools and stuff in the girls' garage space. And I like walked away for a second. I came back and all of them are sitting on the floor crying. And I'm like, what happened? I was gone for 10 seconds. And they were all crying and they're like, we just realized this is the last time we're ever going to be in this space together. And they're like, we literally grew up here. And I was like, oh my God, you grew up here. And so this is also because we were moving. We moved at the end of this month. And they were just such a good reminder to me that like, this is what years of this work looks like. When they go on, our work continues, and yet they carry it with them. And so like, I'm trying to remind myself that as students move on from Girls Garage, like they're leaving a legacy, and then they also come back and they bring back their lived experiences. This is my last slide. The other thing that I am reminded of is like the journey I've taken as an educator, and that is, my 16-year-old self on the ladder in Belize. It's like 1997. This is my student Naomi on a ladder building that sandbox for the preschool. And I love looking at these two photos together because the only real difference is that Naomi is surrounded by other young women. So this is like the difference of 20 years. So I think like as educators, it's often easy to get stuck in the minutia, but like thinking about the long game and like how important this work and how transformative this work really is over a year or 5 years or a decade, like, and how much it matters and how much it can change the realities of our students. Thank you so much.